Welcome to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network. Linda Bazell and I co-created the series. Now, Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community, will be joined in conversation with Trebbe Johnson. Pegi and Trebbe, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us. And Pegi, the airwaves are yours.
Great. Well, thanks, Carol. I'm so excited to be here today. I basically just finished Trebbe's book this morning, about an hour ago. So it's just so rich, so much wonderful material. I'll just introduce her and then we'll get going on the different parts of her presentation. So Trebbe Johnson is the author of Radical Joy for Hard Times, Finding Meaning and Making Beauty in Earth's Broken Places, the book I was holding up. The World is a Waiting Love, Desire and the Quest for the Beloved, 101 Ways to Make Guerrilla Beauty, which I believe is a new book.
A couple years ago.
Oh, okay, right. And many articles and essays that explore the human bond with nature. She is the founder and director of the global community Radical Joy for Hard Times, devoted to finding and making beauty in wounded places. Trebbe speaks 4 languages, has camped alone in the Arctic wilderness, studied classical Indian dance, and has worked as an artist model, a street sweeper in an English village, and an award-winning multimedia producer. She has led contemplative journeys in a clear-cut forest, Ground Zero in New York City, the Sahara Desert, and other places. And right now she lives in rural northeastern Pennsylvania. So to get us started with your amazing presentation, Trebbe, the first question I would ask you is, what is Radical Joy for Hard Times?
Well, just before I answer, I just want to say how really honored and delighted I am to be here. I've been fascinated with ecopsychology for many years, so this is really a treat. So Radical Joy for Hard Times is the practice and the philosophy of giving a gift of beauty back to the earth, specifically places on the earth that have given a lot to humans and other beings and that can't give what they used to be able to give because of human or natural acts. And what tends to happen is that when things happen to places to make them broken or ugly or endangered, there's often a tendency to abandon them. And Radical Joy for Hard Times is about recognizing that these places still have huge emotional resonance for us and for our history and our belief system, our spirituality, and our mental well-being, and that we need to go back to them and recognize that and give to them. That's Radical Joy for Hard Times.
Oh, great. And one of the concepts in the book I was really taken with is the definition. I'm not sure the pronunciation is quite correct, but solastalgia. Can you perhaps tell us a bit more about what that particular definition is?
Yeah, solastalgia is a wonderful term that was created by a philosopher and activist named Glenn Albrecht, who lives in, he did live in Newcastle, New South Wales in Australia. And I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, he started being contacted by people who were experiencing severe psychological trauma because they lived near places where there was a lot of open-cut coal mining. And they figured that he might be able to help them understand what was going on. And so this word solastalgia means the pain that you feel when the place that you love and where you live is under assault. And another way that he has phrased it is the homesickness you feel when you're still at home. So he began studying how the loss of place affects people in profoundly disturbing ways. The domestic violence increases, depression is on the rise, substance abuse increases. And what's so important about this concept, and Glenn has got a new book coming out really soon, like within weeks, I think. But what's so important about this concept is that it gave credence to something that many of us already had experienced, and that is that when the places we love are hurt, we hurt too. And since then, it's been used in court cases, and there have been songs about it. There have been art exhibitions about it, and it's really made this. It's made our sadness when something happens to the places we love real and authentic and sort of almost justified, authenticated.
Oh, and I think a huge part of how you got going, Trebbe, with this work was the story from the Oneida man, David. You can maybe tell us how that inspired you, and it continues to be a huge source of inspiration for you in your work.
Yeah, that was, it's been a long journey to Radical Joy for Hard Times. And it really began in 1987, because at that time I was living and working in New York, writing multimedia presentations and doing soundtracks for them. And for several years, a small team of us would get some money from IBM to write a presentation about an inspiring person or a group of people. And I would go to the New York Public Library and do lots of research and read magazines and newspapers. This was pre-internet. And one year I discovered a man named David Paulus, who's a member of the Oneida Nation. And he had received a National Science Foundation grant to recycle steel waste. And so we went out to his, to the Oneida Reservation. Yeah, there's a funny picture of him and me. When I was many years younger and wore a lot of eye makeup. But he told this story about how he had got this grant, and he drove out to the Kaiser steel plant in California, and he got 2 buckets out of his car because he was going to recycle the steel waste. And he climbed up to this mountain, which he described as being hard and red and compacted and immense. And he got to the top of this mountain and he said to it, "I will conquer you." And he filled his buckets up with the waste, and then he went back down to his car and he put the buckets in the car, and he just thought, something's wrong here. And in the Oneida tradition, they do a sort of a prayer, an invitation called the opening before gatherings, and they invite in all beings, the rivers, the stones, the fish, the animals, humans, ancestors. And so he said he prayed to Creator, show me the right way to be in relation to this waste. And at that moment, he understood, this is what he said, that the waste was not an enemy to be conquered. It was an orphan that had gotten separated from the circle of life. And he said, my job is to bring it back into the circle of life. And so I was really touched by those words. So we created a multimedia show out of this, and we gave it in, Colleen Dewhurst, the actress, narrated it. We presented it in Palm Beach to IBM's top salespeople, and it won an award at the International Film and TV Festival. But the words that stayed with me were those words: the waste is an orphan from the circle of life, and my job is to bring it back into the circle of life. I was so touched by that, because nature had always seemed alive to me. Individual trees and even flowers and stones had seemed alive. And I thought that by thinking about waste not as an enemy but as an orphan, you were already starting to recycle that concept in your mind, so that waste was becoming something different. And I wanted to know more about this. And so it started me off on this very long search to figure out who else is doing work like this, who else is caring about going and looking at places that are damaged and asking themselves what can be done here. Places like mountaintops that have been scraped bare by mountaintop mining, like in this photo here, polluted rivers, clear-cut forests, even trees in your own backyard that have been infested by insect pests, honeybees that are disappearing, species that are extinct. What is it about these places that we can do, that we can give back? And it seemed to me that if we could just change our thinking about what a wounded place is, or what a damaged place is and how to be in relationship to it, then we could really shift our relationship with the world in an important way, and also shift our own consciousness in an important way. Because of course places are so important to us. They embrace us. You go to certain places that you love and you feel held. You feel that you're home. Sometimes you go to these places and you feel at home even if you've never been there before. Places are not only the bringers of physical sustenance like food and water and shelter, but they also provide sustenance for our psychology, our spirituality. All of us come from indigenous traditions somewhere back along the line where people really did see the earth as alive, and the rivers had spirit, and the canyons had special holy beings living in them that could influence the life of the human beings who also lived there. And so when these places are harmed, we feel a terrible sense of loss. It's like something has happened to our own bodies, and our spirit has been ripped out of us. And yet what often tends to happen, as I think I said earlier, we tend to turn away from these places, not out of indifference, but almost because it seems as if the heartbreak of facing them would be too great. Like, I can't possibly go back and confront this place because it's not what it was. And I might be so sad and destroyed that I would never recover. And so it's like the places abandon us is what we feel, and so we abandon them. And of course, the message of psychology throughout the decades has been that we have to face the dark and scary places in ourselves, the places we try to distance ourselves from. We have to get acquainted with them and find out what it is they have to teach us, get to know them in order to work with them so they're not hidden and something shameful and something dark. And ecopsychology, of course, teaches us that the state of our own psyche and the state of the earth are interrelated. And so what I was really seeking during all of those years of trying to figure out what to do with this information from David, I was seeking a way to come back into relation with the dark places on the earth. And one of the things that I picked up on when I was working on this book was that the environmental movement tends to talk about the environment in a way that follows a particular pattern. And it becomes very obvious once you start noticing it. Once I started noticing it, I just found it all over the place. And in the book, I call it the scare, scold, rally pattern. Scare, scold, rally. And so the way it works in news, TV news, talks by environmentalists, you'll get, first of all, scary headlines, like all the fish are dying, the oceans are rising, Gaia is dying, scary headlines with exclamation marks. And then after that, the next part of the pattern is blame. We're at fault. And then it usually turns into the third person plural, we. We're at fault. We fish too much, we drive too much, we buy too much, we use too much fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're at fault. And I think James Lovelock even said, we are a virus causing the death of Gaia. And then after that, there's the rallying cry. But it's not too late. And we see this even with the report that came out on the Intercontinental Climate Change Panel recently, where they said, we have to keep it was the same pattern then at the end, but it's not too late. And that's what the rally part is. It's not too late. We have to change our behavior, and here are some tips on how we do it. And yet what that pattern often leaves out is the emotional attachment that we have to these places. It just sort of skips from scaring you, blaming you, trying to rally you, and never once stopping to say, how do we deal with this? How do we hold in our hearts our grief for these places? And how do we recognize that they have given to us, and perhaps there's something that we can do rather than just stopping our bad behavior with fossil fuels, to give back to these places, to recognize our relationship with them, and to show it in a tangible, physical way. And really, it's like they present these places either as a predator, it's coming to get you, or as a prey, an innocent prey. It's the sort of like in one of these scenarios, the environment is nature coming to get you, to eat you alive, and then in the same article, it's nature is an innocent, like a baby seal that's about to be harpooned. So, but is it something else? And to me, this concept of an orphaned place was a complete breakaway from this pattern of predator or prey. And I was originally calling it, when I was writing this book and thinking about this, orphan, but then it seemed to me that to call it wounded or sick just sort of changed the idea about it a little bit. So the parallel that we can ask ourselves is, when our friends are ill, for example, what do? We don't abandon them like we sometimes are tempted to do with these places that are hurt or sick. We would go and we would spend time with our friend. If our friend was sick in bed and couldn't do what she used to do anymore, we wouldn't say to ourselves, oh, she's not herself anymore, and therefore I don't want to have anything to do with her. She can't go hiking with me. We can't go out to lunch together. Therefore, she doesn't exist. We would go and hopefully we would sit with her, and we would share our stories, and we would ask what her life was like now. And then we would maybe just sit in quietness for a while and pay attention to what's going on in this particular moment, not trying to fix anything, but just being with the present, being in the presence of both the sadness of the reality and the beauty of our friendship and our connection and of this particular moment. And so that's what, and we would give a gift. Often you go to see your ill friend and you bring her a gift. And so that was a part of what I thought, this is what we could do. We could bring together attention and love and compassion and creativity and a sense of giving to these places. So this whole search lasted for many, many years. And I tried several things. I tried holding retreats at broken places, and nobody signed up. People don't want to go. It turned out people didn't want to go to damaged places and spend a week in order to get insight. But one of the things that I did do was to go to a clear-cut forest on Vancouver Island with 3 other people who wanted to do this, and we spent a week there, and we camped in a beautiful protected area. Called it was Carmana Valley. I can't remember the name of the campground, but it's a beautiful protected area where there's like 900-year-old Sitka spruces and cedar trees. And then in the morning we would pack our lunches and we would go out and explore the clear cut, and we would sit there all day. And what was so amazing about that experience was that there would be aspects of beauty. Like one day I was sitting on a tree stump and I saw a bear and 2 little cubs go just tripping across all of this forest debris, just as lightly as they possibly could. And there was one woman there who would make altars on the tree stumps every day. And the altars and the clear cut came to represent for her some damage that had happened in her life. She didn't go into detail about it, but she talked about ways that she had been hurt, that where she had been chopped off like she felt those trees were. And she made altars on the trees for the people in her life and for the trees and for the situations. And it was a really healing journey for her. So what that told me is that by going to that journey was, I think, 2002 or 2003. So it was several years before I founded the organization Radical Joy for Hard Times, which was 10 years ago. And And it was an important clue to me, listening to this woman's stories, that that when you give back to nature, and when you do take the risk of going to these damaged places, there's healing work to do for yourself as well. And I think that's going to be increasingly important for eco-psychology in the years to come, because we can't simply focus on how human beings are helped by nature. Like when I was writing the book, I was looking for stories about how people are not only being helped by going to beautiful nature when they're working with an eco-psychologist, but how they can give back to these places. And there aren't a lot of these stories. The tendency tended to be, at least in what I was reading, that humans are going to get healed by nature. But as climate change becomes more of a reality, and as we're dealing with more and more local ecological assaults, we're going to have to think more about how we get along on the earth and how we can give back, and recognize that our relationship with the earth is not just about the earth giving to us, but about us giving back. And so that was where the idea of the gift came from. And this particular image, which I just love, was made by a woman for an event in Radical Joy for Hard Times that I'll talk about a little in a moment. But the idea of the gift is very important to Radical Joy for Hard Times, because it's an old tradition. It's the idea of giving something back to nature, because when we receive a gift, our automatic response is gratitude, and we want to give back. We want to give back to the person who's given us a gift. If we feel a gift of a beautiful sunset or a beautiful forest, or of watching a fox dart across your front yard, there's also that sense of having been gifted with something, and a sense of gratitude to, whether you believe in God or the goddess or grace or intuition or synchronicity or what. There is a sense of being filled and maybe wanting to give back. And of course, this is a huge tradition in many indigenous societies. I guess I could say all indigenous societies. In the late 80s and early 90s, I used to spend a lot of time on the Navajo and Hopi lands, and writing about a land issue that they were having with the federal government. And the Navajo would always ask the permission of their sheep before they would butcher them, or they would ask permission of a plant that they wanted to pick for medicinal purposes. And they would explain to it they were about to take it, and they would say, this is all done with good intention, and this is for the benefit of the people, and we ask that you benefit as well in the future. So there was always this sense of never taking anything without giving something back. And when we think about doing that in our own lives, it might seem strange. Like, would you give thanks to the frozen food that you put in your basket in the supermarket, or the canned food, or the fresh vegetables? Do you thank each one for giving up their life? Do you thank the rare earth minerals that have gone into making your smartphones and your computers? Probably not. That probably seems like a strange idea. And yet, we can give back to places that have been hurt, and we can give. Sometimes it might feel like it's appropriate to give a gift of consolation. At other times, it might feel like it's relevant to give a gift of appreciation, or gratitude, or sympathy, or joy for a memory, or commiseration for hardship. And what we have created with Radical Joy for Hard Times, with these gifts like the one that you're looking at, is the idea that that a really great gift is one that is just given in the moment by the giver, out of a sense of heart, a filled heart, and then we let go. And so these gifts that we give back to the earth are whimsical, they're playful, they're spontaneous. Sometimes in my book that was published a couple years ago, I call them guerrilla beauty. because what they have in common with guerrilla warfare is that you go to a place, you go anonymously, you go quickly, you do what you have to do, you make art instead of war, and then you leave. You don't expect recognition, you don't put your name there, you don't expect what you do to last. Sometimes the winds will take away these gifts, sometimes animals will walk all over them, or the sea will come and take them away and with the waves. But it's the gesture that's important. It's that gesture of bringing something out of the heart and giving it back to the land that's proved so important. So when I created Radical Joy for Hard Times, the organization, in 2009, we had a big meeting, of course, with a new board, and we talked about, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to introduce this concept? And it was all quite vague at that time. Certain of the elements were there, but the gift element and the going to the place element were there, but not much else. And we said, well, should we have trainings? Should we certify people so some people can teach other people how to do this? What'll it look like? How formulated will it be? And then we never came to a decision, fortunately. And then a few weeks later, I was driving to meet a friend, and it just dawned on me that everybody in the world has experience with having lost a place that they love. And they all have their own traditions, and they all have their own ways of relating to their places. So why not just offer a few simple practices that people can choose to do or not do, and then let people make beauty in their own way. And so the practices that we came up with were, and they're suggested: go alone or with friends to a wounded place. Sit a while and tell your stories. Share about what the place means to you. Get to know the place as it is now, by going off and spending some time alone there, or taking a little walk or sitting. Then coming back together and sharing what you discovered. And then finally making a gift for the place. And we deliberately left this very open-ended. We invited all of the people who participated in what we called that first year, the Global Earth Exchange, to make sure they do the first and the last step, go to the place in person, make a gift, and then everything else was up to the individual group. So in other words, going to the place is important. People would sometimes say to us, well, can I just meditate on the place? Does that count? So we would say, yes, that's great if you meditate on the place, but it's not an earth exchange. You have to really go there. You have to face it. And then the other things are all, you can do them or not do them. You can do them in any particular order, but the giving of the gift is important. So what's been so gratifying to me about this, especially after that long search, is that people have responded in so many beautiful ways. And that first event, which we did in 2010, was just meant to launch the organization. But it was so well received and by so many people in so many continents that we've continued to do it year after year after year. And this June 22nd will be our 10th one of doing it. And it's not like hundreds of groups all over the world are doing it. There may be, 50, 60, 70, 100, 110 groups doing it, but it's very meaningful to those who do it. And there's been such diversity. So there's a group in Bali, for example, that has done and you can put the Bali slide on now, Carol. There is a group in Bali that has done, 1 year they did just a traditional ceremony as part of the Global Earth Exchange. And on this particular year, they made this beautiful little figure in the rice field because they've been having a terrible problem with continuous rainy seasons for the past few years. We have had a group of scientists in Antarctica that have taken a photograph of a vanishing glacier. We've had a group of children leading a beautiful ceremony at Lake Michigan where they were pouring water into the lake and then getting water out and touching it to their hearts and pouring it back. We've had Franciscan monks in Western New York picking up trash at their retreat center. We've had South Africans celebrating an ancient African village. There's a group in Eckerd College in Florida, which has been doing this is their second year where they've been doing global earth exchanges on the beach, which is being eroded as a result of climate change. And then we have a group in Afghanistan that participates every year simply by working in their permaculture garden. So just the creativity and the sense of joy and the sense of love have been so important. And one of the things that I asked myself when I was on this long search is, am I the only one who cares about this? Or is this the kind of thing that a white, Western, educated woman who's interested in alternative ways of learning and healing, am I the only one who's going to think like this and care about it? And the response to the Global Earth Exchange has shown that no, people do care about their places and they want to do something to help them. And one of the things that I have written about in the book is that when there are disasters in a place, and it's especially true of human-made disasters. It's true of both natural disasters and human-made disasters, but especially with human-made disasters like chemical spills or oil spills, is that the trauma that people experience doesn't go away quickly. And I think Linda, you've written about this yourself, and I quoted you in the book at least a few times, that it's a really long, hard process to help people get over the trauma of losing their place. And there's a lot of beautiful work that's been done to help people deal with their grief. And one of the things that we can do is to go back to those places. Not at first. I'm not saying that making beauty for a place is the first thing that has to happen. And there's other kinds of generosity and gift giving that have to happen first. People need shelter. They need to know that they're going to be taken care of. They need food. They need clean water. They need medicine. You know, they need their prescriptions filled. But then after that, after a certain amount of time, something can be done to start healing the relationship. And one of the things that I really want to do with the organization Radical Joy for Hard Times is create what I'm calling an urgent beauty network, where there would be like an international group of people who would get together at a certain time after major disasters and talk about how to give beauty. And so one of the women that has been doing the Global Earth Exchange for several years did an event last year this is a picture of her event. She lives in Florida, and her little house, which was right on the beach, was really totally destroyed by Hurricane Irma. And so she eventually went back there, and it was very hard for her to do because she said that the people who had been hurt by Hurricane Irma were suffering from what they were all calling hurricane brain, like just befuddlement. She said she would go in a grocery store and not have any idea what she ought to buy. Or people would go back to the houses that they had lived in that were destroyed, and they would just sort of pick and poke among all the rubble and not know what to save, not know what was, just not know what to do with themselves. And so it takes a really long time. And so her event, she called it Irmageddon. And she went back there on our Global Earth Exchange Day last year, which was in June. And she wrote on all those little pieces of paper the things that she loved about her place and the things that she wanted to see happening for it in the future. And this idea of giving a simple gift back is really, it's really quite powerful. It has more of an impact than it would seem at first. And of course, there are people who say to us all the time, sometimes particularly environmentalists, interestingly enough, activists who are so engaged in doing the important work of protesting and writing their legislatures and saying, what do we do about all of this? What good does this do? What good is giving beauty back to the earth? But something really magical happens when you reach out and you give back. It's like saying, I am empowered. I am not helpless. I have a way of being creative. I have a way of facing this place that I care about and of reactivating my relationship with it in a simple way and with other people. It's a way of saying that despite religious, political, cultural, educational differences, what we all have in common, those of us who might care to come to this event, is love of place. It's attachment to place. It's a deep grief when something happens to that place. And in this act of giving, you step behind boundaries that you really didn't even know existed until you do this act of giving. And that's where the joy comes from. The joy doesn't come first. I don't think you can replace the grief with joy. I don't think you can even look for the joy. It just happens to come a lot of times because of this act of giving back with other people. And it so often happens with us that people will go to a hurt place and they'll say, I didn't want to go. My friend thought it was a good idea. So I went and I ended up falling in love with the place. And that is what happens. It's like the fairy stories, like the Beauty and the Beast or Skeleton Woman or the Frog Prince, that the beauty does not come before the love. It comes as a result of it. It comes as a result of one of the characters in these stories determining that the inner being of the frog or the prince or the skeletal woman is worth loving. And then through that loving, beauty arises. So I think that's the gist of the message that I have been pursuing all of these years and that I pursue in the book, and with lots and lots of stories. I didn't tell too many stories in this presentation, but there are lots and lots of stories about how people have discovered this. And it's also what the Radical Joy for Hard Times is trying to do in many different ways. So I will stop there and thank you for listening, and we'll see if we have some questions to answer.